Bonjour, chers collègues, et bienvenue.
Hello, dear colleagues, and welcome to meeting 11 of the Foreign Affairs and International Development Committee. I declare this meeting open and pursuant to the motion adopted on the 5th.
Meeting, I would outline briefly, as customary, a few rules to follow. Comme d'habitude, les services d'interprétation.
As usual, interpretation services will be available for this meeting, and you'll see the icons at the bottom of your screen. And please remember, for those of you who are in person, the BOIE's regulations regarding wearing of masks and other health measures.
Wait until I recognize you by name. And when speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And when you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. J'aimerais vous également rappeler.
I'd like to also remind you that all members and witnesses' comments and questions must be put through the chair.
My best to signal you with this yellow piece of paper when there are 30 seconds in your questioning or testimony time. I'll do it both virtually and in person. It's worked quite well, and I encourage you to keep an eye on this card. Maintenant, j'aimerais souhaiter la bienvenue.
I'd like to wish a warm welcome to the Minister, Mélanie Joly, and the officials.
Development. We have Martha Morgan, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. Welcome. Antoine Chevrier, Sous-Ministre Adjoint, Afrique Subsaharienne. Michael Grant, Assistant Deputy Minister, Americas. Alexandre Lévesque, Sous-Ministre Adjoint, Politique Stratégique. Paul Toppel, Assistant Deputy Minister, Asia Pacific. Kevin Hamilton, Director General, International Security Policy Bureau. And Heidi Kutz, Senior Arctic Official and Director General, Arctic, Eurasian and European Affairs. Welcome to the committee. Madame la Ministre Joly, merci.
Minister Joly, thank you for everything you are doing right now in this very difficult period. Thank you for your service and for your leadership. Thank you also for appearing today before our committee. It's my pleasure to give you the floor for your opening remarks for 5 minutes, please. Yes, Mr. Bergeron. Yes, if you'll allow me, Mr. Chair. Of course, there's a French expression that says time goes by quickly when you're having fun. So we are asking the minister to be with us for 2 hours, and she can only be here for 1 hour. Things will go by so quickly. But since the minister is here only for 1 hour, and that most of the discussion during this hour will be with the minister, and that afterwards we'll be holding discussions with officials, I was wondering, Mr. Chair, if we could consider this meeting as being two very specific and different, distinct meetings, which would allow us to have question time that would be more in line with the spirit of collaboration that we saw in the previous legislature, that would give more room for smaller parties, which are the Bloc Québécois and the NDP. Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron. So what you are saying is that you would like a new meeting to be started with the second panel.
Are there comments, are there interventions on this point to essentially restart after the minister's time with us with essentially a new panel and the speaking order of 6-minute allocations at the beginning of that? Let me make sure I have an integrated list of people who wish to intervene. I think all of us members are in person. Mr. Chung, please go ahead.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the suggestion, but I don't support that. Look, we're 11 members on this committee. Each of us is prima inter pares. We all have the right to be on this committee and to have equal time. What is being suggested is that 2 members of this committee would get half of the time. 2 out of 11 members would get half of the time. And that's not fair, because each member on this committee should be given equal time to the greatest extent possible. Now, that doesn't happen under the routine motions that we adopted, but we strive to that to the greatest extent possible. We are moving much further away from that principle if we go to 4 6-minute rounds and then another 4 6-minute rounds in the second hour. It means 2 members of this committee would get disproportionately more time to the detriment of the other 9 members of the committee, and I don't think that's fair.
Mr. Chung, thank you very much. It's certainly within the committee's hands to change the routine motions as originally adopted through proposals like Mr. Bergeron's, but I'd like to hear other views from members in the interest of time, hopefully fairly quickly. Mr. Chung spoke out against the proposal. Any other interventions, please, colleagues?
Monsieur le
Madame
Président, je comprends la
Mr. Chair, I understand my colleague, Mr. Bergeron's suggestion. As he so clearly stated, we have a very limited amount of time with the minister. Can I suggest that we hold this discussion after the minister has left? Because I see that there is room for debate here. Could we discuss this after our hour with the minister? Would that be okay with you, Mr. Bergeron, to restart this discussion afterwards? Yes, that would work, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll give the floor to the minister. Thank you, Minister, and welcome to the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm very pleased to be here today with the committee, and thank you to all the Global Affairs Committee Department team, Martha, and all of those who are online.
Here before you to discuss my mandate letter and my priorities as Minister of Foreign Affairs. I would be remiss if I did not start with the impacts of Russia's illegal and unprovoked further invasion of Ukraine. It's not a hyperbole to say that in the past month, the world has fundamentally changed. When Vladimir Putin launched its unjustifiable further invasion of Ukraine, he launched the greatest challenge to global security since World War II. Les dernières semaines nous rappellent de manière plutôt.
These past few weeks remind us in a rather brutal way that democracy cannot be taken for granted and that it is not guaranteed. Today, the combat is happening in Ukraine, but the threat is to the entire world. As President Zelensky stated before our parliament, his speech before our parliament last week, Ukraine is a sovereign country and is fighting for its life, for its freedom, and for the right to choose a better future for its children. The government of Canada has been doing everything in its power since the beginning of this crisis to contribute to a diplomatic solution and to provide vital support to Ukraine. We are doing so in memory of those who have lost their lives since the beginning of this crisis and those who continue to fight.
And our allies. I just had a conversation this morning with Dmytro Kuleba, the Foreign Affairs Minister from Ukraine, and we're holding a common diplomatic front. Canada and the international community must hold those responsible to account. À travers cette crise, nous avons.
Throughout this crisis, we have seen an unprecedented mobilization of the world economies to impose strict sanctions on the Russian regime. The economic sanctions that we put in place have a very clear goal and a specific goal. It is to cut off the Russian regime and those who are supporting this. And that means those who support this war with propaganda and disinformation. So far, Canada has imposed sanctions on over 1,000 entities and persons from Russia and Belarus. We have cut off the Russian banking system from the SWIFT global banking system. We have also ensuring that Russians cannot move about.
And non-lethal aid to Ukraine. We have donated nearly $200 million to humanitarian efforts, and we are ready to welcome Ukrainians fleeing the war to Canada. As you have heard me say many times, all options remain on the table, and we will continue to put maximum pressure on the Russian regime while we support the people of Ukraine. At
all times, we have exhorted and demanded that Russia change course using all the diplomatic tools in our diplomatic toolbox. We play a key role by putting maximum pressure on multilateral institutions, for example, the UN, the G7, NATO, the Arctic Council, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Commonwealth, and the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie. And that's why we are one of the first ones to have referred Russia to the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. We are doing everything we can to support Ukraine.
I want to thank my opposition critics for the unanimity we have been able to show in this critical file. I believe the message that Canadians and our Parliament stands united with the people of Ukraine is a strong one. I also want to thank you for the constructive ideas you have offered. Before we turn to your questions, I would like to speak to two files that I am working on alongside our government's response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The current crisis has underscored the need for a new approach to working with our democratic partners in the Arctic and Indo-Pacific regions. Upholding and strengthening the rule-based international order are core Canadian principles that have also been under long-term strategic pressure in both the Arctic and the Indo-Pacific. So I look forward to pursuing my engagement in both of these regions and working collaboratively with you, with all members of the committee and of this House. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
Merci infiniment, Madame la.
Thank you very much.
Round one of questions by members. These are 6-minute allocations. Leading us off will be Mr. Chong. The floor is yours for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci, la ministre.
Thank you, Minister, for your opening remarks.
First about Indo-Pacific, and then I'd like to ask about Canada's NATO commitments, and then third, I'd like to ask about energy. So on the issue of the Indo-Pacific strategy, France published its strategy in 2019. The United Kingdom published theirs in March of 2021. A year ago, the U.S. Published its strategy shortly thereafter, mid-year last year. Germany came forward with their guidelines, as they call them, in 2020. So my first question, and the U.S. ambassador I know has said that the U.S. administration is waiting on Canada's new Indo-Pacific strategy. So my first question is, will the government make publicly available its Indo-Pacific strategy when it's complete? And if not, why not? Seeing that these other countries have made it public, and I've actually been able to download these documents online. They're available, so we can understand their approach to the Indo-Pacific region. So will the strategy be made public?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Michael. Of course, the government will make public its Indo-Pacific strategy. I had conversations definitely with Tony Blinken about it as he was drafting his own Indo-Pacific strategy, which was released, I think, in January or February recently. We have looked into it and we're taking good note of it. I was supposed to go to the EU Indo-Pacific Summit a month ago, but because of the war in Ukraine, I came back earlier. So I had conversations with Jean-Yves Le Drian from France about France's position on the Indo-Pacific, and Annalena Baerbock, our colleague from Germany as well.
Do we have any sense of a time frame when it might be completed and made public?
So this is definitely a priority. As you well know, since you were there this week, earlier this week, we had a first event at GAC to make sure that ambassadors from the Indo-Pacific region would be there, that opposition critics and members of this committee could be there. And this is definitely something that I think is crucial for Canada and therefore is a priority.
On to NATO. As you know, we've had a long-standing commitment to spend 2% of our GDP on Canada's military. NATO members agreed today to submit plans for additional military spending in June at the NATO summit in Madrid. My question is, do you support increasing Canada's military spending to meet our 2% commitment?
Well, we both know, and all of us know, that I'm not a Minister of Defense. But what I can tell you is definitely on February 24th, the world changed. And we need to make sure that we adapt to these challenging times. And therefore, I personally think that it is important to do more on the military side, on the defense side in general. Meanwhile, I would just add to that, I think also it is important for Canada to be ready on the diplomatic front, because it is important, particularly in the region of Eastern Europe, that we be there to offer the services that are required.
So maybe I could ask you the question a little differently. Obviously, your mandate letter mentions that you should be working with the Minister of National Defence to expand Canada's engagement to promote peace and security. And obviously, you would not be leading the memorandum to Cabinet, but the Minister of Defence has indicated she is preparing options for Cabinet. Will you support those, an option to increase Canada's military defence spending to 2% when it's presented to Cabinet?
Well, obviously, we all know that the conversations happening in cabinet are secret. You've been in cabinet, so you know how much this principle is important. But that being said, I will definitely support my colleague, particularly while she's working on the NORAD modernization. I think this is important for our own Great North and the Arctic. I think also that Germany has decided to increase its defense budget in light of what happened in Ukraine, in light of also the decision that is completely outrageous of Vladimir Putin to not only further invade Ukraine, but also to become a very important threat to Europe's security and transatlantic security. And so in that line, I think it is important for Canada to be ready.
Thank you. Today or yesterday, French President Macron indicated that the European Union would rely on Canada and the United States to supply fossil fuels to replace Russian natural gas in Western Europe. And I noted in reports that I read today that leaders discussed energy security at NATO, and also the Government of Canada is discussing energy security at the International Energy Agency Summit, which I assume is in Paris. UN National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said there's been an intense back and forth on this issue. What was also indicated today, or yesterday I should say, is that the Prime Minister indicated in a joint statement with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen that officials will meet this week to discuss energy cooperation to reduce Europe's dependence on Russian energy. What is Canada bringing to the table in this regard?
So definitely the question of energy security of Europe is fundamental. The Prime Minister, as you mentioned, met with Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Union, regarding this very issue. And also we had conversations with Chancellor Scholz when we were in Germany about the importance for Germany in particular to be well supported. And my colleague Jonathan Wilkinson just made an announcement earlier today while he was in Europe, because it is important that indeed we continue to support Europe's energy security while continuing to fight climate change, and hence that's why we will increase our production. And that was the announcement that my colleague Jonathan Wilkinson did just before.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
meeting.
Mr. Chong. Thank you, Minister. Mr. Assassi, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Minister. Great to have you before this committee. Now, over the course of the past several months, you have been absolutely steadfast and relentless in championing Ukraine's cause and ensuring that the Western Alliance acts in concert, that they are coordinating their response. We've seen a whirlwind of activity from you, both in the context of international fora, as well as visits you have made to the Ukraine and neighboring countries. I think we can all agree that Vladimir Putin was really thinking that the Western Alliance, there were cracks in that alliance. However, given that you have a very a good perspective and you've been part of all these discussions, what is your view of that? Has this really cemented the Western Alliance's response, and how would you describe it?
Thank you, Ali. Clearly, Vladimir Putin underestimated the West and its unity. Not only did he underestimated it, but his bad decision and lack of judgment in taking this decision has shown how much the West can become united in light of such a severe threat. The unity is done through different ways, definitely through NATO, but also particularly through the G7. And the G7 has become this coordination group where foreign ministers talk to each other pretty much every week. And not only do we speak to each other and are in contact with each other, but also our political directors are talking to each other daily. What I would add to that as well is usually the G7 ministers see each other 2 times a year. And so since we wanted to make sure that our sanctions would have a lot of impacts and would be very much coordinated and there would be no loopholes, we have worked together to exchange data, to exchange names and entities, to see how we could also help each other, particularly on the question of energy security, like Michael mentioned, but also making sure that we are targeting the right individuals and the right entities. We also have worked on refugees. We're working on questions in line with really on question in line with humanitarian aid. And so every single aspect of this crisis is being discussed at the G7 table.
Thank you very much for that. Now, just looking at the latest figures, as you know, this is the largest and broadest displacement of individuals in Europe since the Second World War. You know, having visited the neighboring countries, that so far the latest figures suggest that there have been 2 million individuals who have left the Ukraine or in Poland, approximately 500,000 in Romania, 400,000 in Moldova, 400,000 in Hungary, and 300,000 to date have moved to Slovakia. Given that reality, and given the reality that you have been on the ground there in those neighboring countries, how can we provide assistance to those countries to make sure that they can continue to do an exceptional job welcoming individuals from Ukraine?
So indeed, at this point, Ukraine, well, there's been 1 million refugees fleeing Ukraine per week. This is unprecedented. This is more than what we saw in Syria, and this is definitely having an impact on European countries, as many of these people are women and mothers and children. And there is obviously, it is important for them to have the right capacity in terms of elementary school places and high school places and kindergarten, etc. So we are definitely working with the UN agencies, the UNHCR. My colleague, Minister of International Development, also has been in close contact with the UNHCR. And the UNHCR is in Moldova, is in different countries. And we've provided $200 million in terms of help. But there's something I would like to raise also that is also having an impact on these neighboring countries, because I think this was your question. I had the chance to speak with the president of Moldova, Maia Sandu, a fantastic young woman who's an democratically elected head of state. And she was telling me how much in her country there are really important disinformation campaigns going on that seek to describe refugees as aggressive, violent, and a threat to Moldovans, which is in itself a problem, because the goal of these Russian disinformation campaigns is to destabilize the country, while Moldova have seen a really important increase of refugees. So we want also to work with Moldova to provide financial support, which was announced by the Prime Minister today, but also to make sure that we counter disinformation campaigns.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur Sassi.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I'll give the floor to Mr. Bergeron for 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Minister, for being here, and thank you to all of those who are working with you as well. Thank you also for all of everything you've been doing for the past several weeks to support Ukraine. You'll remember that during a discussion I had stated that if Russia were to attack Ukraine, we would be right in step with you, and we would match your determination in terms of the determination we have to show with regard to this assault. And I don't consider myself the critic, but the spokesperson for my party on foreign affairs. So we have supported all the sanctions that have been imposed so far, and we are very satisfied to see those that were announced today as well. We even called for more sanctions against oligarchs that have interests in Canadian companies. And I did so during the debate on our colleague Michael Chong's motion, and I note that some of these oligarchs are still being spared Canadian sanctions. Now, on March 17th, we heard that no Russian assets had been seized in Canada. Now, Minister, I am very pleased to see many sanctions, but if they have no teeth, what is the use, aside from simply expressing our willingness to impose something, but we need to see the results. Yes, thank you, dear colleague. I'm very pleased to answer your questions. Now, a few points. The government wants to choke off the Russian regime. That is our objective. So we want to impose as many sanctions as possible that are as effective as possible in coordination with our G7 allies. The objective of the G7 in terms of the oligarchs is to have the same sanctions in place. That's why my deputy minister and my team at Global Affairs are working on that. We'll take down the names you mentioned, and we will, of course, follow up on those names. Now, the other thing is that we have imposed about 1,000 sanctions so far on both persons and entities from Belarus and from Russia. Their assets are not useful. As soon as the sanctions are imposed, the assets lose all their value. They can't be traded, they can't be sold, they can't be bought. So when a person, an individual, tries to go against the sanctions, well, it becomes a criminal act. So the consequences of going against the sanctions are quite severe. We have a good sanctions regime in Canada and a good system. And we've just inspired the UK as well. They have their own legislation that they've been developing for sanctions because there are a number of pieces of legislation that have been put in place so that Canada is able to impose these sanctions on the oligarchs. So you'll have understood, Minister, that we support you 1,000%. And we just want to make sure that these sanctions are effective, that we see the impacts on the oligarchs, among others. I'd like to come back to one of the questions asked by my colleague Michael Chong about Canada's ability to help our European allies in terms of oil and gas reserves or oil and gas in general, and that is sending oil and gas towards the Atlantic. That's a whole other discussion that I won't mention here. But in your mandate letter, it states that with the Minister of Environment and Climate Change is to maintain Canada's leadership in terms of climate change and so on. However, you've announced today that there'll be a 300,000 barrels of oil per day and more natural gas, barrels of natural gas and so on. That's going to be an increase of Canada's production. So how do you square that with the mandate letter's objective, which is to conserve our leadership, Canada's leadership on this? Just to come back to a previous point, we are working with Ukraine to identify Russian oligarchs. So I am in regular contact with them. And the Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, and the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, Ms. Stefanishva, also. If you'll allow me, Minister, on that, the Chief of Staff of Alexei Navalny gave us a list when he appeared before this committee, and some of them still are not seeing any sanctions imposed. So I'd encourage you to look at that list. Yes, we've taken that list into under advisement, And our objective is to be able to work on that list, yes. Now, regarding climate change, it's a priority. It's a priority for me personally and also for the government. I am aware of my colleague's announcement, which was made in cooperation with the European Union, which itself is trying to reduce its GHG emissions. I think we can agree that the EU is one of the leaders in the world in the fight against climate change. I had the opportunity also to speak with my colleague Sylvain Guilbeault. So our objective is to maintain our plan to reduce GHG emissions, and he is working on that plan as well, and which he'll be able to make available over the next few weeks. Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron. Thank you, Minister, and I'll give the floor to Ms. McPherson, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Minister, for being here and for all of the staff for joining you today to share your expertise with us. I have many questions that I'd like to ask, but I'm going to start in terms of Ukraine. I mean, obviously, I was recently in Poland with you. Thank you for the honor of being able to accompany you there. And what we saw in Poland was very difficult. It was very hard to see, of course. And we have been discussing about how we can help Ukraine. What is the best way that Canada can help Ukraine? And, you know, as New Democrats, we have always believed that we need to provide the weapons that we can and provide the defensive materials for our military so that they can stay safe and do the work that they do. And so I know while there is these conversations happening with regards to the support for our military, I wonder whether you'd be willing to tie humanitarian aid to that, whether or not we could not say, you know, everyone here recognizes that war is a terrible thing. It is a failure of diplomacy. It is a failure of humanitarian aid. And I hate to see a situation where military spending goes up significantly and humanitarian aid does not follow. You will know, of course, that our official development assistance is extremely low. We are nowhere near our target of 0.7%. And so I would really encourage you to consider tying that directly to aid. I'm wondering if that would be something you would consider.
Well, definitely the question of humanitarian aid is important, particularly in this crisis. And that's why we announced, like I mentioned in my speech, $200 million to support Ukraine in this crisis. And I must say, when comparing, for example, to other countries, and including countries in Europe, we are in the leading countries. We need to do more, Heather, I agree. The situation is dire, and since the situation continues to be dire and that the future is quite dark as of now, of course, we need to make sure that we offer more support. That's why the Prime Minister today announced $50 million of allocation to different UN agencies, but in particular to Moldova, for the reasons I mentioned a bit earlier when Ali mentioned it.
And I think that's wonderful, and of course we welcome those announcements. But I think that it is a bigger picture. It is looking at our overall humanitarian spending, and we are definitely not one of the top countries. Many countries have met that 0.7 target. Many countries have exceeded that, have gotten to 1%. We are nowhere near that. So I just want to clarify that. I also have a colleague who really wanted to be here today, and unfortunately had a medical emergency, wasn't able to. So I want to ask a question on her behalf. She has asked this before, and you know, in the looking at transparency, looking at the way that we send our arms and the way that we look at where arms go once they are sent out of Canadian control, I have some very strong concerns that we are meeting that transparency, we are meeting our obligations under the Arms Trade Treaty. So will you provide the committee with unredacted risk assessments on your government's, that your government has conducted with regards to arms transfers to Ukraine?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So who's that colleague?
One of my team.
That's okay. No, but I can go and see her afterwards. That isn't a problem. But all that to say, yes, we abide by the Arms Trade Treaty. Yes, at the same time, when we provide arms there to the defense, so to the Ukraine military. That being said, I can't give operational details because of security issues. But I could definitely continue to have this conversation and provide the right reassurance, because our goal is to make sure that the arms that we're providing, the lethal and non-lethal aid we're providing, is definitely in the arms of the people fighting against the Russian people.
And we have
the
seen
Russian
that
army.
has not necessarily been the case in the past with Canadian arms, of course.
That is why we are working directly with the Ukrainian military.
And one other thing, I mean, we've asked an awful lot of questions today about Ukraine, and of course that is the most pressing issue in the world, and we want to do everything we can. As you mentioned, on February 24th, the world changed, and we have to be aware of that. But there are challenges around the world that we can't forget about, that we can't forget. And one of those is what is happening with regards to Israel and Palestine. And I do want to just articulate that how it was described in or the lack of description in your mandate letter was problematic. And I know you will be aware of a report that Amnesty International brought forward recently on the state of the situation in Israel and Palestine. And I'm wondering whether or not you will be responding officially to that report, whether or not you will be commenting on that or meeting with Amnesty to discuss this report.
So obviously we're meeting with many NGOs, and definitely Amnesty International, and my team has done so, and I look forward to meeting with them directly. I'm very much aware of the report. You know that the position of our government has always been that we're a friend and steadfast ally to Israel and friend to the Palestinian people. And at the same time, this report mention the fact that Israel's actions constitute apartheid, and we reject that view. And we're firmly committed to a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this is something that other ministers of foreign affairs from our government have said before, and this is still our position.
And will you provide a rationale for why you reject what the Amnesty report claims over 4 years, very robust report over 4 years? Will you be providing any sort of acknowledgement of why that is the case, why you are rejecting it?
Just a brief answer in the interest of time, Minister, please. Thank you.
Well, I look forward to talking with Heather and her colleagues about this even more, and obviously talking with the different communities involved across the country.
Thank you, Minister.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Colleagues, just before we go to round two, just a brief reminder of the Board of Internal Economy guidelines on mask wearing and health. When you're not speaking or consuming beverages, please continue to wear your mask as mandated in those rules. We will now go into round two. Leading us off with a 5-minute allocation is Mr. Genuis. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. Does the government's agreement with the NDP involve any commitments regarding foreign, defense, security, or international development policy?
No.
Okay. Are you confident that that agreement will hold if the government chooses to increase defense spending?
I think, like I mentioned before, that the world has changed on February 24th.
Sorry.
And in that sense, as a government, we will continue to deal with crisis and face these challenges. And I personally think we should increase military spending. And I support my colleague Anita and Anan in this context. And we will have good conversations also with our opposition critics. And definitely Heather and I will continue to have these conversations.
Okay. I appreciate that you want to see defense spending go up. I didn't hear an answer to the question about whether you're confident that the agreement will hold if that increase happens. But you may have your reasons for not answering it, so fair enough. My next question is, as much as the government says it's still thinking about banning Huawei, the long-running status quo by now is that there is no ban. So is the government's way of making a decision simply not making a decision?
So just to go back to your last question, it's difficult for me to answer an hypothetical question. So you don't want an hypothetical answer, I won't answer an hypothetical question. But that being said, you have my answer. The other thing also regarding Huawei, you very much know that this is under the purview of my colleague, Minister of Innovation, François-Philippe Champagne, and he definitely will take a decision on this matter in the coming days and weeks.
In the coming days and weeks, okay, that's encouraging, and we'll be watching that. It seems to me that the Russian invasion of Ukraine demonstrates a failure of deterrence on the part of the Western world. Many important actions have been taken since the invasion, but it is possible that more action prior to the invasion could have changed Putin's calculation. What is your plan? What is Canada doing to ensure that we don't repeat this failure of deterrence with Taiwan? What are we doing to deter an invasion of Taiwan?
Well, a couple of things on that. Going back on Ukraine, our way right now to put maximum pressure on the Kremlin and the Russian regime is definitely to have more sanctions and make sure that also there are more lethal aid sent to Ukraine. And that has been what the Ukrainian government is asking from us and asking from the G7. And that's what we're really coordinating together. Meanwhile, we know that while we're doing this, which is at the core of the unity of the West, China is watching. And so our how can I say, our expectations towards China as member of the UN Security Council is that they don't do anything to escalate the conflict in Ukraine. And meanwhile, I've asked my diplomats to convey that position across the board in different multilateral form, including in China. I think also that on the question of Taiwan, the Minister of Trade has launched recently a free trade agreement with Taiwan, which is important because there's strong people-to-people tie with Taiwan. And we think also that we can increase our trade with Taiwan.
Thank you, Minister. Just in the interest of the time, though, could you speak specifically to the issue of deterring a possible invasion of Taiwan by the PRC?
Well, I think right now the unity of the West and the fact that we are protecting through this unity our strong stance on the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity is fundamental.
Okay, I think we do need to hear more on what the plan is with respect to that, Minister. I think that's an important thing for us to be discussing internationally. I want to ask you one more question the time I have. Do you believe that Canada experienced foreign interference by state or state-backed actors during the last federal election?
This is a question that is much more under the purview of my colleague, Minister of National Security, Public Safety, Marco Mendicino. It's part of his mandate letter. And should that be the case, obviously, we would take strong actions on that.
Okay, looks like I have time for one more, which is what is the government's current position with respect to whether or not the Chinese Communist Party is committing genocide?
Well, we take the allegations of genocide very seriously, and particularly in the Xinjiang region, the Uyghurs. That is one of the reasons that, first and foremost, we didn't send elected officials to the Beijing Olympics to show our strong opinion regarding this. And also the second thing is when I was in Geneva a month ago, I had the chance to meet with Michelle Bachelet, who's the head of the UN Human Rights Council. She has been investigating these very important allegations. She will go to the region in the coming weeks, and I look forward to her report.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Genius. Merci, Madame la Ministre. Je passe la parole maintenant.
I'm going to give the floor to Ms. Van Duyn for a short 5 minutes, please. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here with us today. The illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia has really brought to light the issues of defense and our Canadian sovereignty in the Arctic, as you mentioned during your introduction. We know that this is an issue that will become more and more important. I'd like to hear how you see the current situation and how it has changed because of the war in Ukraine. Who do you see as being our allies when it comes to protect sovereignty in the Arctic? An excellent question. Thank you, Rachel. Well, of course, we need to take into consideration what is happening in Ukraine and the fact that we have a neighbor with whom we share a maritime border, and that's Russia. Usually, discussions regarding sovereignty in the Arctic were held at the Arctic Council, but Russia was chairing it this year. So since we decided to isolate Russia diplomatically, financially, and others, we have suspended our participation in the Council with all other members of the Arctic Council. So we are not participating in that work at the moment. We are coordinating with the United States because it's clear that we work with them to in concert with them to protect North America. And it's important that we also work with our Scandinavian colleagues who are also members of the Arctic Council. I had the opportunity to hold various discussions with our Swedish, Finnish, Norwegian, and Danish colleagues on this issue. We need to also protect our own sovereignty in the Arctic because it has always been Canada's position, and it still is, that we have very strong views on our territorial integrity in the Arctic. So you see the U.S. still as our allies in terms of our sovereignty in the Arctic. Yes, for defending our territory, yes. I'd like to come back to an issue that was raised by my colleague in the House, but that I am also wondering about. You said that it was an individual choice for Canadians, that is, whether they want to join the Foreign Legion in Ukraine. And I completely agree, but it is, according to law, illegal for Canada to fight against a friendly nation internationally, but there's no definition of what a friendly country is or an enemy country is. What would be the resolution to this? Well, we condemn any form of aid by Canadians to Russia. That is our position, and that is the position I will reiterate on all our platforms. And so, in terms of Ukraine, well, in terms of Ukraine, there are various things. Since February 1st, we've been stating clearly that Canadians needed to leave Ukraine. We are also telling those who were in Ukraine, or rather who were not in Ukraine but wished to go to Ukraine, that they should stop. And when the war began, we said that those who are in Ukraine who were being bombarded had to take measures to protect themselves and seek refuge in safe areas. As I've said in the past, these are very personal decisions. If somebody decides to go, that's very personal. At the same time, the capacity to provide consular services is very limited because our officials are now working from Poland. They have left Ukraine. Under these circumstances, and if people decide to fight and go fight in Ukraine with their colleagues, friends, or perhaps family members, it really is a personal decision, and that must be made based on an on information. You said from the beginning that the government's aim is to choke off Russia. Could you tell us more about what that means? Does it include having Vladimir Putin leave? Well, the goal is to put as much pressure as possible on him and his close entourage. And so that's why we have sanctioned him, his Minister of Finance, Defense, and so on. All members of the Duma, that is the lower house in Russia, and we've announced sanctions against the upper house, the equivalent of our Senate as well in Russia. We've also targeted many oligarchs, and we have put a lot of economic pressure as well. We removed many Russian banks from the SWIFT banking system. We can see that in economic terms, Russia is paying a high price for invading Ukraine, and that's why the value of the ruble has fallen dramatically. Physically, since Western airspace is close to Russia, we have isolated Russians as well from accessing Western countries. Thank you very much. I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Bergeron for 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vous savez, Madame la Ministre, que
You know, Minister, many newspaper articles have highlighted what I would call the difficulty for Francophones to really find room within your department. One of the mandates is to promote the French language in all diplomatic missions. So first, I'd like to hear from you what initiatives have been put in place by the department to make sure that the other official language of this country is very much visible and present within your department. And also, in line with this question, soon, or rather about 1 year ago, the position of ambassador in France was vacated. It took only 6 months, 6 weeks, I believe, only to replace the ambassador in the UK, or the High Commissioner, rather, in London. Why is it taking so long for the ambassador position in Paris when we have a long-standing relationship, diplomatic relationship with France from the very beginning of the foundings of this country? Why is it taking so long? Is it because we can't find somebody who would be able to occupy this position? Thank you, colleague, for this good question. You know, the issue of official languages is fundamental, and it's been fundamental and essential to me since the very beginning, since my involvement in politics. And in the White Paper, when I was Minister of Official Languages, that I tabled, I had stated my intention to do more in terms of French at global affairs. Also in the bill, the aim was to crystallize the role of the Canadian Francophonie Organization with Canada. So that's been done. When I was appointed, I spoke with my Deputy Minister, Martha Morgan, regarding my concerns regarding the place of French at the department. And that's why 2 new deputy ministers have been appointed. We see them on the screen, Antoine Chevrier, Alexandre Lévesque. One is in charge of Africa and the other of all public policy here as well. Our colleagues from Global Affairs can work in both official languages, and I want to state and to clarify that I have been requesting my briefings in French, and I work with my diplomats in French, and sometimes also in English, of course, depending on my counterparts and the issues and files we're working on. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. That's your time for the moment. Ms. McPherson, 2.5 minutes also.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Chair. You know, Minister, today you were talking about how what we're seeing in Ukraine has chilling echoes with what we saw in Syria. We are seeing the war crimes, the crimes against humanity that we saw in Syria be repeated in Ukraine, almost as if it was a blueprint. And one of the things that I am seized with when I reflect on that is that we do still have Canadian citizens, Minister, that are still being held with no charge. They are still being arbitrarily detained in northern Syria. They are Canadian citizens. Many of them are children, Minister. What is being attempted to bring those Canadian citizens back to Canada, and if needed, to be tried here if they are guilty of crimes?
So thank you, Heather, for that very important question. You may recall that my colleague, Minister Garneau at the time, worked on a very important directive to make sure that indeed the Canadians that were in Syria, particularly children, could be supported to come back to Canada. And indeed, that has been the case in certain cases. Also, there was in that directive the fact that people that were particularly facing health challenges would be also supported. And so our goal is to make sure that when they come to Canada, although that they be trialed under the criminal code. And also, we take very seriously the threat posed by Daesh, because we know that people that are held in that camp in Syria also are linked to this threat.
Children clearly aren't, Minister.
That is why we put into place this approach.
I would just highlight too that, of course, a Canadian is a Canadian, and all Canadians deserve consular support. The one last question I would have very quickly, if you could tell us a little bit more about how you are implementing the feminist foreign policy, when we can expect more information about that, and perhaps even just to touch a little bit on how, what we could be doing to ensure that those principles of the feminist foreign policy are embedded in our response in Ukraine as well, please.
Minister, and with apologies, just a very brief answer. You're literally down to seconds in this intervention. There might be a chance to follow up in response to other colleagues' questions on that same issue.
Well, our government is definitely a feminist government, believes in this feminist foreign policy that we put into place. Women, peace, and security is fundamental. And what we're seeing in Ukraine right now is a lot of mothers, grandmothers, and children fleeing the country since men are under conscription rules. And so that's why we want to have an approach that is based on their needs, and that is in line with how we approach crisis.
Thank you very much, Ms. McPherson. Thank you, Minister. Mr. Morans, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for your candid responses today. One of the things that I'm curious about is NATO's position on the no-fly zone. And the reason I'm asking is, and the rationale I think is correct as to why it wouldn't be appropriate to have one. What I'm really more curious about is why NATO chose to make that position public. Why broadcast to someone like Mr. Putin what you might or might not do? Why not keep him on tenterhooks, wondering that we might?
Well, Marty, I can't speak in the name of Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO. This is the position that NATO took and decided to communicate. And so I won't go into the different hypotheses why they did so and not. What I can tell you, though, is many members of the alliance want to make sure that we do as much as possible without crossing this red line posed by NATO. And we know that the question of the airspace in this conflict is important. And so hence, that is why we provided ammunitions and lethal aid. And that's why also other countries have done so in a very substantial manner.
Thank you. And my next question just has to do with, we've been seeing the ongoing talks between Ukraine and Russia, although it's unclear as to what progress has actually been made. There have been reports lately of a potential peace agreement, or not peace agreement, a ceasefire at least. Sorry. I wish it was a peace agreement. But do you have any information you can share with the committee on what actual progress is going on between the bilateral discussions between Ukraine and Russia?
That is one of the reasons why I speak to Dmytro Kuleba, my colleague, Minister of Foreign Affairs, 2-3 times a week, to know what is going on at the negotiation table and how we can reinforce them. I can't go into the details, but we provide our reading of the situation and advice as well to the Ukrainian government. And since we have a very close relationship with Ukraine, many times we take the different demands that Ukraine wants to make to the G7, and we provide them bilaterally to many of the G7 members. So that is why then I have many conversations with my German counterpart, which I get along very well with, Annalena Baerbock, Liz Truss from the UK, Tony Blinken, etc.
Thank you. And just on the mandate letter, one of the items the mandate letter calls for you to work with the Minister of International Development to establish a Canadian centre to expand the availability of Canadian expertise, to assist those seeking to build peace, justice, promote human rights and democracy. Obviously, a very important initiative in light of how the world has changed, as you pointed out. I'm just wondering if you could inform the committee as to what progress has been made on that item.
Thank you. So we are definitely looking at what we can do in the world to promote and support and empower democracy. That is why also we participated in the Democracy Summit organized by the United States. But that is why also we're working on different initiatives, including, for example, the arbitrary detention declaration. And also I'll have more to say in the coming weeks about that, because this is certainly something that my team and I are actively working on.
And yesterday, the United States Cybersecurity Advisor, and I realize this is a security question, but if you have any information on this, I'd appreciate your providing it to the committee, took the White House podium to say that there's an increasing likelihood of a Russian cyber attack on critical infrastructure in the United States. Is Canada concerned about this, or are we prepared for something like that?
We're always very concerned about any cyber threats, particularly coming from Russia. It is important that we be resilient to any forms of cyber threats. And at the same time, I must say that the United States strategy to declassify information and intelligence has been quite helpful. It has helped make sure that we inform our different populations across the West regarding what is going on in Ukraine and also the intent of Russia. It has been useful also to make sure that Europeans and North Americans are on the same page in reading what is going on. And finally, I think it has been a way to delay to a certain extent the conflict, and meanwhile for Ukrainians to be ready to organize themselves, and us as well.
Mr. Morantz,
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister. And our final intervention for this round goes to Mr. Sarai. Please go ahead for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Minister, for staying longer and finishing the round. Much appreciated, especially in this really time-pressing international events. A lot of focus has been on the European Union, the European Front, NATO, European Union, as the war is at their footsteps. However, it's just as much as it is in Central Asia. What efforts are being made to garner support for Ukraine in the Indo-Pacific, and particularly with countries that are sitting on the fence, as things can very easily spill over into their backyards and into their region? So are there efforts to be getting more allies in the Indo-Pacific and Central Asia?
Thank you, Randy. It is very important. It's a very important question you're asking. We know that there were 141 countries that voted at the UN against Russia's further invasion of Ukraine, but there are also 35 countries abstained. And our goal is to make sure that we engage also with these countries. Definitely this is something we're talking about within the G7. This is also something that my colleague Maurice Payne from Australia and I spoke about earlier this week. I had the opportunity to talk to Vietnam earlier this week to engage them about Ukraine, because we partner with them in the context of our Indo-Pacific engagement. Also, my deputy minister was in India last week to engage with the government. I had the opportunity to have a good conversation with the ambassador here, and look forward to also engaging India. And also, we need to make sure that we engage China for the reasons I mentioned before, because I think because they sit on the UN Security Council, it is important that they do everything not to escalate the conflict.
Thank you. My other, going to a different angle, will be more in light of cyber. Can you discuss the work led by Canada to fight disinformation in this context, whether it's propaganda within Russia, propaganda outside, and how the West can fight on that war? I know it's not particularly in a defense manner, but in a global affairs perspective.
Well, you know, in every war, information is key, because it justifies why you start war. And what we've seen since the beginning of this war, well, before the war, there was a big propaganda campaign, because we were saying that there were troops that were getting organized around Ukraine, and Russia was saying no, that's not the case, and clearly they lied to our face and to the world. Afterwards, they said that the reason why they were sending troops to further invade Ukraine was to denazify the country. While we know Zelensky himself is Jewish, they were saying that in the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, there was a genocide happening. It's extremely not only false, but it's clear manipulation. And also, since then, they've been engaging in more and more of their propaganda. And meanwhile, we know that it is happening regarding in Ukraine and in Russia, but at the same time, it's happening in our democracies. We've banned RT and Sputnik on the broadcasting side. We've pushed digital platforms to also ban them, but we need to do more. And Canada is chairing two important coalitions this year, the Freedom Online Coalition and the Media Freedom Coalition. And our mandate, and my mandate as Foreign Minister, is really to counter propaganda online. Social media companies need to do more. They need to make sure that they recognize that states have jurisdictions over them, that they're not technological platforms, but they're content producers. And it is our way collectively to make sure that we can really be able to have strong democracies in the future, because this war is being fought with 21st century tools, including social media.
Oh, thank you. Quickly, how effective are sanctions and measures on curbing Russia's supply chain and ability to fund the war?
Well, they're very effective. Very effective. It's not only us. It's clearly also, in general, Europe and the US and the UK. But we need to do more to make sure that Putin's war chest is not available to him. The fact that the ruble lost a lot of value is a way for us to make sure that we continue to put maximum pressure. We've did a very important announcement today with more sanctions, but also more restrictions on export. The Prime Minister announced that earlier today. And you've heard me saying it in French and English, but, we need to suffocate the Russian regime, because this is our way to really, at the end of the day, make sure that Russian people understand what's going on, although they're under huge propaganda, and also that we are able to make sure that Vladimir Putin is under tremendous pressure, including within his country.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Sarai. Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sarai and Minister. This leads us to the end of our second round and the end of our time with the Minister. And on all of our behalfs, I'd like to thank Minister Joly for her hard work, and thank you very much.
We will let you continue with your day, and we will go on to our second hour with officials on the same subject matter. Colleagues, just before we go there, we had parked a conversation earlier on the time allocation for this second hour. You're welcome to resume that. Maybe we can quickly come to an agreement. And I understand there's also a second point of order by Mr. Oliphant.
No, it's on that point.
It's on that same point? Okay. Mr. Oliphant, please go ahead.
Just to save time on this, because the only question I would really want to ask the officials is how much they like their parliamentary secretary. I would say as a one-time deal, because of the different nature of this meeting, I will split my 5 minutes between Mr. Bergeron and Ms. McPherson, so they have extra 2.5 minutes each, either probably added on to their time and then we can move on. I don't think it should be a precedent, because I think we really should follow the work we've done in setting times, but because of the nature of this, I'm happy to do that.
That's very, very generous of you and very kind and very pragmatic, Mr. Oliphant. Thank you for that. The other point I was going to raise...
Well, that doesn't require unanimous consent because
It's a gift. Yes, I think it'll be gratefully accepted. Colleagues, just before we launch into the second hour, please keep in mind that we are expecting bells at 5:15. And notwithstanding the conversation we just had, I just want to see if there's unanimous consent to continue to 5:30 before we go to votes. Any opposition to that? Okay, so we'll carry through as far as we can with the round that's in front of us and the reallocation that Mr. Oliphant has just offered. We will go right into our third round, and leading us off is Mr. Abultayev for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to go back to the Arctic policy and the plan, how we're going to defend the Arctic. We know Russia is a headache. Russia owns basically, or their land stretched toward the Arctic, and that's the biggest, threat to our sovereignty and to the remaining partners out there. But also China. China also is showing a huge interest, not just on a development side or a trade side or the, One Belt, One Road initiative, but further militarily speaking. So how are we going to really address that, and how far the plan is going to make sure we are ready? As far as we're speaking right now, there is no plan. We don't have the policy in place. All other parties already have their arms in place and their plans in place. So how are we going to deal with China on the Arctic?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that excellent question. Mr. Chair, I think when we look at the Arctic, we think about it from a broad perspective, and we have an Arctic and northern policy framework that we're co-implementing with provincial, territorial, and Indigenous partners. And this framework is committed to ensuring that the Arctic remains a peaceful and stable region that's grounded in international cooperation. And it looks across the various challenges that we see in the Arctic, including environmental challenges, climate change, ensuring the participation of Indigenous people in the development of the Arctic. And it also includes security and defense. And you have noted in your questions that one of the mandate letter items for the Minister of National Defense, and also one of the items on the Canada-U.S. roadmap, which was agreed to last year after the inauguration of President Biden, is NORAD modernization, and that will be a key element of moving forward in terms of defense in the Arctic, as well as many initiatives that are already underway, which would probably be best discussed by my colleague, the Deputy Minister of National Defense.
Beyond the NORAD and the redevelopment or modernization of this tool that we have, but there's other aspects that needed to be developed in the Arctic. What do you see the top priority of the government, as our government, as far as developing the strategy that most needed? Because time is definitely an essence, and all the winds are blowing against our face as far as the Arctic, due to being neglecting that for the last 5-6 years of this government. How can we assure ourselves that we are ready at all aspects in the broad view that you've just mentioned?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I think that there's two issues here. One is the broad perspective about the Arctic, and we see the impact of climate change. We see the impact of that on communities, on infrastructure in the Arctic. We see the need for a rules-based international system to be followed and to protect the environment of the Arctic. We know that we need to work with our Arctic neighbors, and of course that is very challenging right now, given what Russia's doing in Ukraine. And we also know that one element of that needs to be defense. There are a number of areas right now where the Government of Canada is already working on us from a security perspective, in terms of working with the U.S. to modernize NORAD, the Royal Canadian Navy is taking possession of new ice-capable patrol vessels. Work is going on the Nanisivik Naval Facility. So there are a number of areas where work is already ongoing in the Department of National Defense with key partners, with the United States. As the Minister noted, we are maintaining close collaboration with our other Arctic partners because we really need to see this region holistically for the important region that it is that touches so many of Canada's interests.
Between Russia and China, do you see that the challenge is going to be different between a country that have land in the Arctic and a country that does not have land? How do you see that we can approach those both? Are we going to approach them the same way, or we have a different relationship as far as the Arctic with Russia, for example?
Well, I think there's no question that we are concerned about the increase in military presence of Russia in the Arctic. Russia is obviously a neighbor of ours in the Arctic, and they have been building up their military presence in the region. I think that from China's perspective, I think that they see the Arctic primarily as an economic pathway, as a way to get goods more efficiently to other parts of the world. But also we see Chinese research ships, for example, sailing through the Arctic and that sort of thing. So we have to be mindful that China also has broader geostrategic interests. And given Canada's primacy in the Arctic, we need to take that very seriously.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Abouteif.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abouteif. Mr. Bergeron, with Mr. Oliphant's time, you'll have 5 full minutes. Thank you very much. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Oliphant very warmly for his generosity. And it avoids us having to take time away from this committee meeting to discuss speaking time. So thank you very much. I'd like to come back to this issue, which is quite relevant. A question asked by our colleague, Ms. Van Duyn, regarding the countries we can count on to ensure our protection in the Arctic. Without wanting to look like I'm asking this in bad faith, I must say that what I'm concerned about is that some of our closest allies are challenging Canada's sovereignty in the north. I'm thinking about Denmark and the U.S. in particular. There are key issues that we are confronted with regarding China and Russia's ambitions in the north, especially Canada's Great North. You'll remember that a Chinese company wished to set up and acquire a mine in the Canadian North. Can we really count on our allies to protect this territory, considering the fact that some of them are challenging Canada's sovereignty on this territory? Thank you very much for this question. One of the reasons why we have a strategy that we're working on with our partners is to address such issues.
Elements of our strategy, one of really the pillars of our strategy is to ensure that the rules-based international order, the international rules that govern all of our conduct, respond effectively to new challenges and new opportunities in the Arctic. I'm very confident that we will be able to work through our issues, for example, with Denmark under the existing rules-based international system as 2 countries who respect that system and will use its rules and its procedures and its processes in order to do that. That being said, I think we have to be eyes wide open as an Arctic nation, and we need to work with all of our neighbors to resolve the issues that we may have, but also to constructively work together on the common challenges that we see in the Arctic. And I think it really does go to the importance of having agreed upon international rules and systems to resolve issues, but also the importance of having international institutions within which we can work constructively with those allies in order to move forward our common priorities.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Now, from when the Canadian government indicated that it did not wish to increase its military presence in the north, Well, how will the government ensure our sovereignty in the north and modernize NORAD equipment to ensure protection of Canadian territory? Yes, thank you very much. We recognize, of course, that safety and defense of the Arctic, of the Canadian Arctic, requires effective international frameworks, that requires international cooperation as well as national defense and the ability to use this defense.
Or in response, Mr. Chair, to a question, all of the items that the Department of National Defence is currently working on in order to strengthen Canada's defence in the Arctic, and also that there's a commitment in the mandate letter to both the Minister of National Defence and the Minister of Foreign Affairs to NORAD modernization, and that's something that we'll work with the United States on. So I think there's the things that we are already doing that are already being done, as well as the NORAD modernization, which is something that is a commitment that the government has undertaken, and to really work closely with the U.S. because the U.S. is our key partner there.
Merci.
Thank you. Oh, well.
All right. Ms. McPherson, with the second half of the allocation that Mr. Oliphant has transferred and the additional 30 seconds, 5.5 minutes, please go ahead.
I feel like I am welcomely receiving charity from many of my colleagues today, so I will take it. Thank you very much for being with us again today. I wanted to start with some alarming news that we have heard out of Afghanistan recently. The news that we have heard that the Taliban is banning women from participating in education. This is devastating. Of course, it's just been over 6 months since Canada left Afghanistan. We have not met our obligations to the Afghan people in terms of refugees to come to Canada. And while Ukraine is seizing all of our attention right now, I don't want us to lose track of the fact that there are other humanitarian crises happening around the world. Can you tell me what the response Canada will be having with regards to this, and perhaps even touching upon how this intersects with our feminist foreign policy, since I know I didn't give the minister enough time to speak about that?
So thank you for that question. Canada's priorities with respect to Afghanistan are, first of all, safe passage for for vulnerable Afghans and for Canadians, the timely delivery of humanitarian assistance, the Taliban's respect for its international obligations, notably the fundamental rights of all Afghans, including women and girls, and coordination with partners on counterterrorism. Clearly, the decision that we all learned about yesterday about the Taliban's decision to send girls over the age of grade 6 home from school and not allow them to go home to school is something that we think is absolutely unacceptable. We're very concerned about the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Afghanistan, and also about the Taliban's control of the rights of women and girls, and this is but one indication. On the humanitarian side, Canada has provided over $130 million in humanitarian aid, and we're working closely with UN humanitarian organizations to make sure that meets the needs of the most vulnerable Afghans. And what I would say on how this intersects with Canada's feminist foreign policy, well, you know, there couldn't really be a better example of how Canada's feminist foreign policy makes a difference. We look at the assistance that we provide from the perspective of whether it will reach women and girls. We look at whether women in that humanitarian sector are actually able to be part of the workforce there. We look in terms of what more we would do to support other needs of the Afghan people in terms of the positions that the Taliban is taking, and we advocate at every chance that we get for the Taliban to respect the right of women and girls.
Thank you. That's such important work, and it breaks my heart to see the losses that we've seen in the rights for women and girls in Afghanistan. Another thing that's very, very difficult right now is the threat that we are seeing around the world with regards to nuclear weapons being used in the conflict in Ukraine. Your colleague, Mr. Hamilton, won't be surprised by the question I'm about to ask, but we do know that this is a moment in time where we could be looking at disarmament more, that Canada could play a bigger role on disarmament. We do have the TPNW that has now been announced. It will be in Vienna. It will be at the end of June. Will this government consider, as Norway has, as Germany has, to send an observation mission, knowing that there will be parliamentarians from the Parliament of Canada from almost all political parties? Will the government of Canada send an observation mission?
Let me just say, by way of introduction, and then I will turn this one over to my colleague, Kevin, who's at the table with me. Let me just say, by way of introduction, that we are outraged by the threats that President Putin is making in this regard, and we, as well as our G7 and our NATO allies, have decried these threats at every opportunity. It is irresponsible and, in fact, reckless. And I actually cannot believe in 2022 that the President Putin believes that that is acceptable, even to suggest this. But let me turn to Kevin on the more specific question that you've asked.
Thank you, Deputy. I agree wholeheartedly that arguably there's never been a time in our history where movement towards nuclear disarmament was more important. Unfortunately, because of COVID, the NPT review conference has had to be postponed several times. It is now set for August, and Canada will be a full and constructive participant at that review conference. On the TPNW specifically, we do have some reservations about the structure of that treaty, and that there's no verification mechanism involved in it. But we understand that it exists, that the TPNW has been formulated because of the large-scale frustration among the international community about the slow pace of disarmament. And so no decision has been taken at the moment as to whether Canada will send an observer to that conference, but it is under active consideration.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. That's your time for this one. You'll have a chance to come in again in the subsequent intervention. Mr. Chung, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Morgan, for coming to us today. I have a question first about the Arctic, and then some questions about Canadian energy and the European Union. So on the Arctic, in recent years, this predates Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there was emerging cooperation between the United States, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, in the Arctic, in particular, joint military exercises with fighter jets. Is Canada seeking to participate in that multilateral initiative? There's, just by way of background, so in recent years, the U.S. began, as an Arctic nation, having the state of Alaska, began to very closely cooperate with Nordic countries to the point where they were, some of them non-NATO members, conducting joint military exercises where U.S. fighter jets were being staged and based and leaving from Nordic country air bases and participating in joint exercises, joint training exercises, not just in the Baltic Sea, but also in the Arctic. Canada, to my knowledge, has not participated in that initiative, and I'm wondering if we are seeking to participate in that Arctic cooperation going forward.
I'm going to ask Kevin Hamilton to answer this question.
So on those specific exercises, I'm afraid I don't have a good answer for you. I don't know what our plans might be, and I'd have to defer to National Defense on that. Okay. But I do know that we take active part in NATO exercises, including the deployments of the exercise we've just done in Norway. Also, Finland and Sweden often do take part as NATO partners in NATO exercises.
You're talking about the Cold Response 2022?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. I have a couple questions on energy security. We have this joint statement between the Prime Minister and the European Commission President that says that there's a working group of officials that's going to be established. They're apparently going to meet this week to talk about reducing European Union dependence on Russian natural gas. So what are officials going to be proposing at this meeting? What are Canadian officials going to be proposing at this meeting, seeing that the statement's now public and discussions are going to begin?
Mr. Chair, the issue around energy dependence, I think, brings up a broader issue around the knock-on effects of of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, including the increase in the price of energy, including the commitment in response of the EU to reduce its dependency on Russian oil and gas, but also including the increase in the price and reduction in the availability of food and the potential for a broader humanitarian crisis. And I think all of these issues are issues that we need to work on collectively with allies.
Yeah.
On the issue specifically of the working group, that would be a question that would be best directed at my colleagues at the Department of Natural Resources, who will be engaged in that group. The response to the issue, to the crisis in Ukraine, is really a multi-departmental one, and we are all bringing all of our tools and all of our policies to bear in order to address the multiple and variable consequences of it.
Well, thank you, Deputy Minister, for that answer. I'm glad you raised the issue of food. The World Food Programme indicated, I believe, last week that food prices could escalate as much as 22% in the next 6 months, a result of a lack of natural gas. Most people who don't live in agricultural regions don't realize that half of our global food production, almost half of our global food production, is based on natural gas. The revolution of modern agriculture has allowed for the production of nitrogen fertilizer from natural gas. Through the, I believe it's called the Haber-Bosch process, which has allowed for massive increases in food production. I know in my area of Wellington County that we're looking at potential problems with crop production this year because of the lack of natural gas, particularly prices of natural gas and the increases in nitrogen fertilizer and costs and lack of fertilizer that's available to feed the world. And I think this is something that the Canadian government should be very seized with, seeing that we are the 5th largest producer of natural gas in the world. We have some time to head this off if we start working on it right now. I'll just finish with that. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chong, thank you. Thank you, Deputy Minister. And we will now go to Mr. Zuberi for 5 minutes. Please, the floor is yours.
I'd like to thank the Global Affairs staff for being here with us and making your time available. I'd like to start off with the war in Ukraine, and we know that Vladimir Putin, who's the aggressor and perpetrator of this war, has started it for many different reasons. We see that he's insistent on continuing and continuing in this conflict. Also, a lot have speculated that there are, imperial sort of ideas. He has a large ego, etc. With respect to allowing this conflict to wind down, and for him to save face, are we as a country working with our partners and allies to have an off-ramp for Vladimir Putin that allows him to save face and brings an end to this conflict?
Thank you for that question. I mean, I think one of the questions on all of our minds right now is how does this end? But at this point, our primary objective is to isolate Russia, working with our allies to impose significant costs on Russia so that President Putin understands the consequences of what he's done, and to encourage him, therefore, to cease his aggression and to engage in diplomacy and resolution of this issue in a meaningful way and in a way that is trustworthy. And I think that, you will have seen reports in the media that there are technical discussions happening between Ukraine and Russia, that various world leaders have intervened with President Putin. And I think that those world leaders have been encouraging him to cease and desist the aggression and to, in good faith, engage in discussions with Ukraine, and that's really what has to happen here.
Thank you for that. I'm sure that you're aware on February 22nd, 2021, the House of Commons voted unanimously that what China is doing, the government of China is doing to the Uyghur people rises to the level of genocide. While this was not a binding motion, there is a moral prerogative, I would say. I'd like to know, what are we doing to protect vulnerable Uyghur populations, in particular in third countries outside of China? What are we doing to protect those populations? Could you update us on that?
Thank you. We believe that the human rights situation in China is of grave concern, specifically with respect to the Uyghur people, but other minorities as well as the situation in Tibet and Hong Kong. And we've called for, as Minister Joly noted, a transparent and unfettered access in order for the situation to be assessed. And particularly by Madame Bachelet. In terms of what else we're doing, we've taken a number of actions in order to address the risk of forced labor made by Uyghurs. So that includes, for example, the prohibition of imports made in whole or in part by forced labor, responsible business conduct guidelines developed for Canadian companies, a business advisory, export control. So, and as well, we have imposed sanctions on a number of officials within China who we believe are implicated in the human rights abuses of on the Uyghur population.
And while I'm on this subject, I would be remiss not to bring up the name of Hussein Jalil, Canadian citizen, who's been detained for several years in China. We've given a lot of attention to the two Michaels. Hussein Jalil hasn't benefited from the same amount of attention. There have been suggestions, actually more than suggestions, calls for us to have a special envoy dealing with, to ensure his release. This was made by former Attorney General Irwin Cotler. Can you comment on that, on the consular services and the idea of a special envoy?
Yes, we are very actively engaged since Mr. Jalil's initial detention in 2006. We continue to raise his case at every opportunity that we get. The department continues to provide support to the family of Mr. Jalil as well. So this is an issue that is very important to us, and we continue to raise it at every opportunity with our Chinese interlocutors.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Zuberi. Mr. Genuis, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellent questions from my colleague, Mr. Zuberi, and I would note that Mr. Jalil's wife has expressed some frustrations in terms of the interactions or not having the same level of engagement in recent years, especially since 2015, and that's what she said. I wanted to ask about sanctions, further about sanctions. Could you advise on how much money and assets are frozen in Canada because of sanctions on Russia?
As Minister Joly noted, we have imposed sanctions on over 1,000 individuals and entities. And in addition, we have worked with the G7 to remove the access of a number of Russian banks to the SWIFT system, as well as to remove their access to their
I'm aware of that, but
their reserves.
My question was with respect to how much money and assets have been frozen in Canada as a result of that sanctioning.
I don't have that information because that is really, once we get into the enforcement space, that is the responsibility of financial institutions, and it's the responsibility of the RCMP and the CBSA in terms of enforcement. So what I can tell you, though, is that anyone who is sanctioned, anyone who's on that list, any assets that they have in Canada are frozen, which means that they can't trade them, they can't
Yeah.
sell them, they can't do anything with them.
I understand
but
that.
we don't track. We
Yeah.
do at Global Affairs. We don't track what those those assets are.
Would you be able to get that information from partner agencies and share that with the committee?
I will get whatever information
Thank
I
you.
can, but it's not. I'm not sure that we actually have that comprehensively. One of the which is one of the reasons actually why you've seen globally the formation within the G7 of the task force, which includes our Department of Finance, the Treasury in the U.S., as well as European counterparts, in order to ensure that these assets are tracked. And that there's appropriate enforcement. So I think that's one area that we're working on as well with allies.
Yeah, it will be of great interest to the committee to receive that information. So we do look forward to a written follow-up advising on what information you have and sharing that information to the extent that it's available. Is the government considering sectoral bans as part of their suite of sanctions? Perhaps things like the sale of equipment used for oil and gas production in Russia?
We've actually just approved a swath of sanctions, which are essentially more like an export ban on certain commercial products. And this will align us with the export ban that was announced by the U.S. Right after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And while I can't go into detail on that here, I'm happy to provide you with all of the export controls that includes. And that will include a lot of equipment, machinery, sort of parts that are useful in different industries, et cetera. And that's the purpose of those export controls. So beyond the process which we have right now, which is really focused on military or dual-use export controls, this will control the export of commercial-grade products.
Okay, thank you. I think the tone the minister talked about really suffocating the regime and its capacity to wage war. I think those are important words, and we want to see strong follow-up in terms of sanctions that target Russia's economic capacity to wage this war. I had asked the minister about foreign interference, and she replied that it wasn't her area of responsibility. I did have a look at the mandate letter, and her mandate letter from the Prime Minister actually does speak about combating foreign interference. Could you advise what what Global Affairs is doing? Or what Global Affairs' involvement is in the issue of foreign interference?
Right. Well, I mean, the lead role of in terms of combating foreign interference is within the public safety agencies, but of course there are foreign policy considerations that need to be brought to bear when we look at foreign interference. One initiative that we have, which is actually quite interesting, is called the RRM, or the Rapid Response Mechanism, and the Prime Minister just announced its renewal a couple of weeks ago when he was in Europe. And that organization, it's a small but tiny group in my organization that actually looks at foreign interference in elections abroad.
Can I just ask quickly, the time I have, did we see that interference in Canada's last federal election? That was my question to the minister.
Yes.
You would seem to know about it.
That would be a question that you would be best put to the Minister of Public Safety, because it's really the public safety agencies that have the primary responsibility. But I do have a small unit that looks at foreign interference abroad and looks at social media and sort of what is happening in social media, and do we see any sort of evidence of that? So.
Okay, thank you.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Genuis and colleagues. Bells are going. Just a reminder that we agreed to go till 5:30, and I think we'll land pretty much on the nose with the remaining time that's left. Mr. Estasi, please, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Morgan. As you know, the minister didn't really have occasion to get into the issue of how Canada is leading the way to make sure that we are documenting and gathering evidence about war crimes and crimes against humanity that Russia may be committing. Could you tell us what the significance of that is?
Well, we have been very actively working with our partners. First of all, in the motion that was brought before the ICC by Ukraine in order to declare that Russia's rationale for this invasion was was completely unfounded, and that was a successful motion. And we will continue to work with our allies as we move forward to document war crimes, because our view is that there will have to be accountability, and that it will be critical, not just for Ukraine, but for the world, that there is accountability, international accountability for the actions that are being taken now that are targeted at civilians and that contravene international law.
Thank you for that. Now, if I could follow up on the question Mr. Zuberi had with respect to the case of Mr. Jalil. As you know, the facts of that case are painful. To just know how long it has been that we have been trying to affect his release, but of course that has not been the case. Would you be in favor of appointing a special envoy, as Irwin Cutler has suggested?
Mr. Chair, we have a very strong consular team within the Ministry of Global Affairs, and we work tirelessly to assist all consular cases, including the case of Mr. Jalil. And we are in constant...
So far, it seems like it hasn't been effective after 15 years, correct?
I understand the frustration around this, and I certainly understand and note the frustration of the family, because this is a very, very difficult situation for a family to find themselves in and an individual to find themselves in. But you can be assured, Mr. Chair, that our department is actively engaged at the most senior levels and consistently and trying to gain, at a minimum, to gain consular access to Mr. Jalil, which has been a challenge.
Thank you. It was just announced, actually, that President Biden and the White House have indicated that they would like to see Russia ejected from the G20. Does Canada have a position on that issue as of yet?
We are working with our close allies to look at how we need to deal with Russia in every international forum in order to isolate them, and we would support isolating Russia in every international forum. And the question is really on a case-by-case basis, what's the best way to do that?
And just given that the G7 actually released its communique and indicated that position, which you have just stated, what are some of the other fora where it appears that we would be successful ejecting Russia from membership?
Well, we're looking across the whole range of international fora and working actually not just with global affairs, but across all government departments. I think you would be surprised to know how many international fora there actually are. And we need to look at each one on a case-by-case basis to see what's the most effective way, what's the most effective thing that we can do. So I think the Arctic Council is a good example where we have paused all meetings of the Arctic Council because Russia is in the chair of the Arctic Council. And we're assessing what the best way is for us to actually sustain the constructive work that that organization has been doing over many years that's of real importance to Canada. So in each case, we need to look at what's the best way to do it, how do we do it, and then how do we make sure that we don't that we sustain the effective, important work that those organizations are doing.
Thank you very much, Ms. Morgan. That's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Isasi. I think we're at coming up on 8 minutes to 5:30. We've got 4 interveners waiting. If we do 2 minutes each and get everybody in that way, would that be okay? Just a very quick 2-minute back and forth, and then everybody gets a chance to get in their last question. Avec ça, Monsieur Bergeron, pour 2 minutes.
And with that, Mr. Bergeron, for 2 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll be quick then. In May 2020, the previous Minister of Foreign Affairs, François Champagne, stated that it was in favor of having Taiwan come to the WHO, but then we saw that Canada was more favorable to Taiwan joining the other forum for health, International Forum for Health. So first, is Canada in favor of Taiwan joining the WHO? I believe it's a very timely question. And also, there's also the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So what's Canada's position regarding these demands from Taiwan? Thank you very much for these questions. We are in favor of supporting Taiwan's participation in organizations where its participation and its presence provide an important contribution. And we're disappointed that Taiwan was not allowed to participate, for example, in the World Health
Assembly and the ICAO Triennial Assembly since 2016 due to pressure from the mainland, but we would certainly support Taiwan's participation in those fora.
Another question, if you'll allow, Mr. Chair. We heard that the Ethiopian government, according to Al Jazeera, say that there was a humanitarian crisis, an immediate one, and it hoped the government rather to funnel aid and to provide aid to the Tigray region. Do you have any information on that for immediate help and aid? And will the government of Canada be using the ceasefire to ensure that the Tigray region population gets the aid it helps?
Calling for since this conflict began, and we think it's critical to get humanitarian assistance into the region.
Thank you very much. Ms. McPherson, please, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This came up in the House today, and I think you all are aware that we're about to celebrate the anniversary of the 7th year that Yemen has been under attack and has been in at war. There's been over 250,000 people killed. Of course, there's been 4 million people displaced because of the war, and 70% of the population, including 11.3 million children, are in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. Now, for me, the obviousness of Canada selling arms to the Saudi regime that is in fact putting these harms on the people of Yemen is something that is quite hard to bear. The United Nations Human Rights Council has twice named Canada as one of the states fueling the ongoing war in Yemen by continuing arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Considering that Canada is trying to become a member of the Human Rights Council, the United Nations Human Rights Council, will you be reviewing the sale of LAVs to Saudi Arabia that have been named by the United Nations as being used in the conflict in Yemen?
Mr. Chair, Canada has one of the strongest export control systems in the world, and respect for human rights is enshrined in that legislation. Every export permit application is reviewed under our risk assessment framework and is fully consistent with the Arms Trade Treaty, which is inscribed in our Export and Import Permits Act.
A 2019 report by Global Affairs Canada said that there were some concerns about that. I'm just wondering how you can have concerns in 2019, but in 2022 think that it is completely all right.
Mr. Chair, we are also very concerned about the humanitarian situation in Yemen. The humanitarian situation in Yemen is one of the most difficult situations right now globally, and we fully support humanitarian assistance for Yemen and doing everything that we can to support a peaceful resolution of the conflict.
Thank you very much, Ms. McPherson. Mr. Morantz, please, 2 minutes.
I'm going to take
Mr. Chong, please go ahead.
Spot. Thank you. Just a clarification. I think it was the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations that said that food prices were going to spike 22%. But there are alarm bells ringing, and I guess I'll just finish not by a question but by a comment to Global Affairs officials, both online and here in the room. I do not think that the government is seized with this problem. And I think it's pertinent in the discussions taking place about natural gas in Europe, whether it's at the International Energy Agency, the joint statement between the Prime Minister and the European Commission, or the discussions that have taken place at NATO. Canada is the 5th largest natural gas producer in the world. And nitrogen fertilizer, which accounts for half of the world's food production, comes from natural gas, from this process called the Haber-Bosch process. And I know this because I come from an agricultural region. half of the food production in the world. Agricultural producers are ringing the alarm bells. I've had agricultural producers in my region and farmers coming to me in the last several weeks saying there is an emergency with nitrogen fertilizer. Crops are going into the ground in the next 10 weeks or so, and if that nitrogen isn't applied, crop yields will drop. In fact, right now in Europe, there is a 10% shortage in nitrogen fertilizer, and analysts estimate that that's going to lead to a minimum drop in European crop production of at least 7 to 9% this year. You add to that the food inflation of the last 24 months, you add to that one of the world's major bread baskets at risk of not planting the crop, which is Ukraine this year, and we could be looking at a major food shortage in 6 months. And I think governments need to be seized with this issue right now. And I want to put this on the table, Mr. Chair, because I don't think we are seized with it. And we as a country are privileged, not just because of our immense landmass, which produces a lot of the oil, grains and oil seeds that this world consumes, but also because we have the natural gas to produce the urea that needs to be applied in the next 10 to 12 weeks to make sure that we can feed the world. I think this is a crisis that we have not seen in decades, and I think governments need to be seized with it right now, particularly in light of the discussions taking place at NATO, the International Energy Agency, and between Canada and the European Commission this week. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chong, thank you very much. Final intervener this afternoon, Mr. Zuberi or Madame Bandera?
Are you taking it? Sure. It's up.
Mr. Zuberi, go ahead.
Okay, thank
Please.
you. Very quickly, myself, I'm of South Asian heritage, and there have been concerns around the treatment of minorities within the world's largest democracy, our friend, and the protection of those minorities, especially as of late, within India. Can you tell us what are we doing as a country to see that the touchstone values within India, the world's largest democracy, of minorities being respected and protected are actually being realized?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. And maybe I could just comment on the previous comment before I answer this question, which is to say that we are very seized with this issue. The G7 is very seized with this issue. We see fertilizer prices increasing. We see food supply shortages. And we know that there will be a humanitarian consequence and that it needs to be addressed collectively. In terms of the issues, in terms of human rights in India, I was actually recently in India last week, and I had the privilege of meeting with a number of human rights defenders and also a number of women to discuss feminist foreign policy. And one of the things that we do in our mission is we support this kind of discussion. We provide safe spaces for human rights defenders to come and to discuss issues and to talk about how they're going to work together. And we also have local programming where we can support that kind of work.
Got 30 seconds if you've got another quick one.
Please.
Very quickly, I do have a question as to what may be asking you to hesitate or blocking the possibility of establishing an embassy in Armenia.
Our international footprint is determined by our budget. And we have embassies in over 110 countries, and we have offices in different places. But really, our footprint is a function of decisions that have been made and the budget that we have.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we are 15 minutes away from the vote. As agreed, I would like to, on our collective behalf, thank our officials, Deputy Minister Morgan and her senior leadership team for being with us. We look forward to speaking to you again in the near future. And with that, colleagues, we are adjourned. Merci beaucoup. Bonne journée.